jobs in construction. I'm joined by Andrew Berger-Gross, the other ABG, to talk a little bit about the labor market. Andrew, what's going on with the labor market in North Carolina?
Thank you, Anita. Well, what we have in North Carolina right now is what economists call a tight labor market. And what I mean by a tight labor market is we have relatively few job applicants, job seekers, per job opening. And a tight labor market creates a situation that's advantageous for workers because they have less competition from other applicants for a given job. On the other side, though, it can create challenges for employers who are seeking to hire because they have a smaller labor pool to draw from.
So let's talk about what this means for employers. What kinds of complaints are you hearing at the Department of Commerce?
Sure. So at Commerce, every 2 years, we conduct a statewide survey of employers called the Employer Needs Survey. One thing that we're seeing in this year's survey is a big increase in the percentage of employers who are reporting problems hiring, from 39% in 2016 to 50% in 2018. And one of the top reasons they list is a lack of applicants. So for years, we've been hearing about the lack of skilled talent. Right now, we're at a part of our labor market where we're lacking warm bodies to fill the positions that these companies are trying to hire for.
So we have some really hot sectors in North Carolina. Construction is certainly one of them. You don't have to be an economist to be able to count the number of cranes across our state.
Of course.
What does this tight labor market mean for the construction industry in particular?
Well, it means a couple of things. And really, construction, there's a two-sided story when it comes to the labor market for construction jobs. One thing that you notice is that even as the overall labor market has tightened, the construction field in particular has tightened far more than other fields. So to put this in perspective, right now the labor market for construction jobs is 10 times tighter than it was at the height of the recession. So by implication for employers, it's 10 times harder for them to find a worker.
Okay, so everybody who is hearing this is scratching their head and going, I don't get it. Why this kind of result in construction?
Sure. So it's basically a matter of mathematics. Since the Great Recession, well, particularly since the Great Recession, but even from before the Great Recession, we have seen a decline in the amount of labor supply, the number of job seekers in construction, while we've seen a very large increase in the amount of labor demand for construction, the number of employers who are looking to hire construction workers. And there are a number of reasons for that.
And so it's one of them that people just don't want to work in construction anymore?
It's hard to say for sure. So one thing that we do know is that during the Great Recession in North Carolina, we shed a third of our construction jobs. They just went bye-bye. So if you were in a field where a third of the jobs disappeared, what would you do? You'd probably look for work in another industry. So some Census Bureau research looking at the entire nation, not just North Carolina, has found that about 60% of those construction workers who were laid off or lost jobs during the Great Recession either left the labor force entirely or went to a different industry. And of course, this is an industry that has traditionally been populated by migrant workers. We've seen a decline in immigration for a number of reasons, one of them being the improving economy in Mexico.
So one of the things that's pretty clear is construction still offers a pretty decent wage. And so construction companies are now seeking to expand their labor pool by doing interesting things like trying to recruit more women into the field, trying to recruit people who may have had some association with the criminal justice system into the field. What are other interesting strategies, or who are other groups that one might look at to expand the labor market?
Sure. Well, particularly those groups that you just mentioned. When we think about how to expand labor supply, how to make the labor market a little less tight, well, some of the mechanisms we have are population growth. As we know, our population is growing slowly because of lower fertility rates. There's also immigration from other countries, as I mentioned before. That is on a downward trend. A big strength for North Carolina has been state-to-state migration, so pulling in talent from other states. But of course, also within the state, we have those that are on the sidelines of the labor force, maybe those who were discouraged during the Great Recession, who might now be finding more opportunity and need to be brought back into the labor market, as well as those individuals coming through what we might call the talent pipeline, the educational system, those completing high school and post-secondary credentials, as well as those, yes, re-entering society after a term in prison, or those active members of the military who are returning to the civilian labor force.
Absolutely.
These are all new sources of labor supply.
Absolutely. I want to be clear here that when we talk about a tight labor market, the answer isn't to just sit back and wait until the labor market loosens up a bit.
Sure.
Because some of what we're experiencing is really more about fundamental shifts in the economy.
That's right.
Give some thoughts about that, if you might.
Sure. So economists often try to differentiate between cyclical change in the economy and structural, and I'll explain what that means. What we mean by cyclical change is that the economy grows, expands, and shrinks, declines in cycles. The last big cyclical downturn that we saw was the Great Recession. Now we are in an expansion period. But there are also things that change across the business cycle, whether or not we are in an expansion or a recession, and these are called structural trends. One of the big structural trends over the last 20 years has been the decline in what economists call routine jobs, jobs with tasks that are repetitive and that can be automated through software or through machinery.
So this is sort of the rise of the robot?
In a sense, but not just robots, software. I mean, if we think about the evolution of office technologies over the last several decades, from the typewriter to the word processor to the personal computer, we've already seen some of these advancements in technologies that reduce the need for administrative assistants, clerks, these other clerical types of jobs that we used to have in much higher numbers in the office sector.
So one of the things that's clear is there is no reversing the reality of automation. Indeed, we can just expect it to accelerate over time.
I agree.
If you're sitting in a community, particularly in one that is a rural community in North Carolina with some distance from an urban center, and you're wondering, well, what does this mean for me? And how in the world do we build a talent pipeline given these realities? What's your answer?
Well, that's a difficult question. Bringing up the subject of regions is, well, it's another topic entirely. In addition to the structural trends impacting which industries are growing and which occupations are most in demand, there are, of course, regional trends in the movement of population and the movement of employers. What we've seen is a lot of these non-routine jobs, jobs that we might call knowledge jobs, professional services jobs, research jobs. They tend to be concentrated in your large knowledge center urban areas, such as the Charlotte area, such as the Research Triangle in Raleigh. Those are the growth industries, and they tend not to be located in rural areas. There are still some opportunities for rural development, but not as much as there might have been in past years where agriculture and manufacturing were really the employment drivers in North Carolina.
So one of the things that's really exciting to me is to watch across the state and to see how many different types of communities are trying to figure out what is their asset base and how do they build a pipeline, a talent pipeline around that asset base. These are exciting times in our state.
Certainly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us, Andrew.
It's my pleasure, Anita. Thank you.